Okay, today my guest is Professor Nicole Coviello. I will keep my introduction short to maximize our time with her. In the next 30 minutes or so, we'll talk about Nicole as a person, Professor Coviello is a thought leader and an esteemed scholar, and finally as a mentor to many PhD students and junior faculty. For the sake of time, I'll skip many of her accomplishments and give you a very quick snapshot. Professor Coviello is an AIB Fellow. She has received Gerald Hill's Award twice for outstanding contributions to entrepreneurial marketing, American Marketing Association, and the AMA Entrepreneurial Marketing Special Interest Group. She was reported as one of the most influential international marketing scholars in the world, with 4 articles in the top 25 list of publications. And in 2014, she was ranked 18th in the world of IB and was the only female in the top 20 list for the discipline. Nicole is an associate editor at the Journal of Business Venturing, and she's a consulting editor at JIBS. Thank you, Nicole, for joining us.
Thank you.
First question always is, what did you want to become when you were a child?
That's actually a really good question. I've been thinking about that, and I have no clear recollection of wanting to be anything. And I don't know if that's because I wanted to be a lot of different things, but there's no one thing that stands out in my mind as a child. By the time I was a high school student, for some inexplicable reason, I do remember wanting to be a marine biologist, which is very strange because I grew up in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, which has no water around it. So what triggered my interest in marine biology is beyond me. I also remember wanting to be a physiotherapist. So by the time I was 18 or so, that's what I was thinking I was going to be. But as a small child, either no recollection or I was just having fun.
Interesting. Nicole, when can you remember the earliest moment of distinction between domestic versus foreign?
I probably didn't think of it in exactly those terms, but my dad was a school teacher and he taught for the DND, the Department of National Defense from Canada. Before he married my mom, he actually taught in Germany, in Zost. And by the time he had his family, he thought this is a great opportunity to do it again. And so when I was 8 years old, my family moved to Germany. And because we were not military status, we were not allowed to live on the base. And so I spent just over 2 years in small German villages, one called Hügelsheim and the other one called Muggensturm, in the southwest of Germany by Baden-Baden. And that, I mean, as an 8-year-old, I was, thrust into a different kind of environment. And although I was in English language schools on the Canadian Forces base, our friends were either the kids that lived in the towns with us, and there weren't very many of us because they had to be school teachers' children of a certain age, or they were the German kids in the community. And we also had quite a lot of Romani gypsies in the community as well. So that was my first exposure to the concept of international.
It's very colorful. It's very colorful.
Yeah, I have been eternally grateful for my mom and dad for making that decision. And in fact, over the years when I was a teenager, while other families might go up to their cottage or cabin or to a summer home of some sort, we traveled as a family internationally. And I know that at the time, my sister and I were thinking, oh my God, we'd rather go to the lake. We'd rather go to a cottage. But in hindsight, I am extremely grateful that my parents had the wisdom to take us all over the place.
Interesting. It is very colorful, actually, very colorful. Nicole, how did you choose your field? How did you choose to be entrepreneurship, marketing, international focus, international context? Why did you choose this area?
I'm not sure choice came into play. It was more of an evolution of maybe learning about myself. As I mentioned, when I was in high school, I was thinking I would be a physiotherapist, and that was because I was a speed skater and I was always injured, and the physios were always helping me. And I went away on an exchange to Sweden right after high school. I did a Rotary exchange to Umeå for a year in the north of Sweden. And that year exposed me to business people, because Rotary is just a club of business people. And in those days, it was businessmen. And I thought, gosh, maybe this is interesting, business. So it wasn't marketing, it wasn't anything like that. It was just business. So I came home from Sweden and I enrolled in a Bachelor of Commerce program at the University of Saskatchewan, my home university. And I was exposed to, I'll use accounting as the best example, accounting early on. And I spent an entire Christmas holiday in my bedroom crying because I was sure I had failed accounting. So it turns out I didn't fail accounting, but that confirmed for me that an accountant was not going to be my future career. So the other thing that I did like, which was very clear to me at the time, was marketing. So I ended up doing a BCom in marketing. After that, I took a job. I was recruited away from that job to do an MSc in technology management. It was a brand new program, and they wanted some of their top business students combined with top engineering students. And so we had this small program in Saskatoon, and I did that. So that moved me from marketing into kind of the technology side of things. And entrepreneurship was not a popular word in those days. You might be looking at small businesses, but entrepreneurship was like, as a discipline in business schools. And after that, I moved to New Zealand. And I was 24 years old, and I found myself in a country that is, at that point in time, we had 3 million people and 70 million sheep in 1987. And while 3 million people is a tiny domestic market, 70 million sheep, there's a lot of them, but they didn't buy anything. So New Zealand as a nation is by definition international. So I found myself, having shifted from marketing into technology, I moved into the department that I was in, ultimately in Auckland. I started off at the University of Waikato, and then I decided to do my PhD, and I did it at Auckland. It was the Department of Marketing and International Business, because those two were seen to be kind of not intertwined at the University of Auckland. So I ended up doing a PhD in marketing and international business. By virtue of the fact of being in New Zealand, I was studying software developers. So that's the technology side. And that field was just beginning in the late 1980s, early 1990s to shift from being about SME internationalization into this new field called international entrepreneurship. So timing wise, I got really lucky. So that was my evolution. I didn't choose IB. I ended up there, and I think I was always open to it because of the fact that I had learned another language when I was a child. We traveled a lot. At 24, decided, yeah, I'm moving to New Zealand. So I kind of had that inclination and right from the beginning, I think.
It's fascinating. I mean, I normally ask my colleagues, what is something not on your CV that people would find interesting? I'm going to skip this one for you because
Sure.
You said speed skating.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you wouldn't put on your CV which would top speed skating? How much of a speed are we talking about? What was your record? Like, what did you speed? What is
So
your...
I was a long distance speed skater, an outdoor speed skater. And I should actually point out that in international entrepreneurship, if people are familiar with Douglas Cummings, he and I were both speed skaters, and he came from Winnipeg, and he's an international finance entrepreneurship guy, very, very well known in his field. And he was Canadian champion and a variety of other things. He's younger than me. I competed internationally, but I was, so here's the real truth about me and speed skating, is in the end, I sucked. And I was good enough to be competing at an international level because I was really determined, and I was strong, and I was, basically okay. But what I learned from the speed skating was that I was going to make a better coach than a competitor. And that actually has influenced me quite a lot, because when I stopped competitively skating, I coached for a few years, and that's probably where the educator side of me came into play. So I learned about myself that, I could try, and I was never going to make the Olympic team. I could be on a junior national team, but nothing else. Or, I was good, but not good enough. So what's the other option? Coach. And then what's the other option from there? Teach.
Did you break a bone?
Did I what?
Did you break a bone? Did you fall?
Break a bone?
Yeah.
I did not break a bone, but I had a really spectacular crash in one race. And there was 4 of us actually that crashed. All of us ended up in hospital. And I had what they determined to be a sprained neck and head. And all I remember, because I wear glasses, my glasses were kind of like this on my face. And I couldn't kind of see straight. And I had a concussion, but no broken bones.
Super interesting. Okay. Super fascinating, actually. What is one thing you wish you would have done that you didn't? What's a regret that you have?
It's interesting. That's a really good question. I have never regretted doing what I'm doing until this last year. And this last year, I was on a sabbatical that was a complete dud of a sabbatical. I was unwell and couldn't travel, and there's a variety of things that meant the sabbatical was really a wasted sabbatical, but it got me to thinking about things. And I was reflecting on my role as a business school professor, and I thought, I wish I'd been an epidemiologist. I wish I worked in the medical field. I wish I was doing research that would actually save people's lives or make a difference in people's lives. And that's not to say business profs don't. I mean, the kind of work I do is actually, I know it helps young tech firms, because they tell me that. But if I could have done anything differently, I think I would have and should have probably gone into the medical profession.
6 more years, why don't you do it?
Yeah.
Okay. Last question. What are you most passionate about?
I think some people would say to me that it's probably my work, because I spend a lot of time working, too much time working, but it's not. That's probably something I've learned over time, is that it's really my family and friends that I'm most passionate about. And not just my immediate family and friends. I have about 5 years ago, friends and family got together, and we brought a family over from Syria. And there was 6 of them and an 86-year-old grandmother. Well, no, she's 86, 81-year-old grandmother at the time. And then they've since had another child. And then one of my colleagues brought more of their family members over. So my passion is not just my immediate family and friends, but it's also our Syrian family, because they are now a big part of our life.
Interesting. Let's switch gears to research.
Sure.
And let's say you're stranded in a small village. Locals don't know who you are. They haven't read your work. How do you explain your research to people who are not in our area?
Okay. Well, I do research on young technology firms that want to grow. And to understand them, I look at things like how they create new products, how they go international, serve international markets, the marketing activities that they participate in, and the people that drive all of that, the people that are kind of responsible for all those kinds of activities.
Well, what are some of maybe the top 3 areas that are understudied in international, maybe variables, maybe contexts, locations? What are some of the things that we need to study more?
Top 3, the one that always springs to mind to me actually relates to my last point, is that I think historically international business research has underestimated the importance of studying the individual, because it's not the firm. Let's say it's an MNE, and the MNE as an entity doesn't make strategic decisions. It's the people in the MNE that make those decisions. It's the CEO and the top management team, or it's the board, or there's individuals, people who are making decisions. And this is where the entrepreneurship lens comes into play, I guess, because entrepreneurship research, while looking also at firms, has a strong interest clearly in the entrepreneur at the individual level. So bringing that lens into international business, I think, is important. And we're getting there, but it's taken a long time. And I used to look at IB research with no interest, because it was all about these big international firms. And I was in New Zealand, where all of the MNEs were headquartered in Australia. And basically New Zealand had just, it was dominated by small independently run firms. And I thought international business is missing the boat by not looking at these organizations. So that's a big one for me. I think that's something that's coming down the pipeline, is we have to look a lot harder at sustainability issues. And that has so many different dimensions. don't even know where to begin. But growth for the sake of growth is not a solution. How do you sustain growth, or how do you sustain a healthy organization or an international presence? And that's a separate kind of sustainability than some others people would maybe describe it as. But I think we need to look more at sustainability. It's probably the two that I can think of at this point in time.
Perfect. If a PhD student comes to you and says, I'm thinking about a dissertation topic, two questions actually. What is the one area that you tell the student not to work on because we have already studied it too much? And the second question is, what is the advice that you will give to the student to study? Because it is, you just listed two items, but what's a research question that they should pursue so that they can have a great career like yours?
Ooh, well, I think I can answer the first one. Not sure about the second one. The first one, and but that kind of answer is going to reflect my personal preferences. So, I'm really not interested in MNEs. I'm not interested in FDI. I'm not interested in even entry modes anymore. But that's just me. Mm-hmm. Others could find this really, really fascinating. And I think we have to say that even if you're studying FDI of multinationals, because our context, our business context is changing all the time, what we know about MNEs and FDI, for example, also changes. So nothing is static in IB, and that's a good thing. It makes it hard in terms of doing research, but it's a good thing. So I am not inclined to say no to anything. What I do with doctoral students is with doctoral students, I don't give them topics, and I won't tell them areas to work in. The reason for that is I've learned that if you are given a topic or told that you're going to be part of a bigger project and this is your piece of it, it's really hard to develop passion for that topic because it hasn't come from you. You haven't had a life experience that's triggered it, or you haven't had enough time to think about it, or it's just, I don't give people topics because that generally doesn't work for me. At least that's the experience I've had. So I encourage people to come up with their own topics based on their readings. And as long as I think I can contribute something from a supervisory perspective, so it's maybe in entrepreneurship and international, or it involves networks or something like that, I'm willing to have a go because I'll learn something from it as well. Yeah, that's kind of my advice on the process.
Let's talk about creativity in research. What does your mind think of when it wanders idly, like there's idle curiosity? Where does creativity come from?
So I probably don't let my mind idle very much. I seem to go from one thing to another without a lot of time for self-reflection. I need to do more of that. We all need to do more of that. The COVID years helped me do that. So I'm trying to be a bit more mindful of things. When I am idle in my mind, I basically am thinking about the next thing that I'm going to do. So one of the ways I try to stimulate my creativity is it doesn't come from idle minds. It actually comes from me doing something. And so I paint and I sew, and I do a lot of reading of murder mysteries and those kinds of things just to get me out of the workspace. And not just the research space, but when you're a senior academic, you not only have your research, but you generally have a leadership role in your institution, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that takes up a lot of headspace. So I do literally creative things to move me out of that space.
Interesting. Nicole, last question in the research segment. What can we say about the evolution of IB thinking, what it was like and what it will be like in the near future?
Interesting. So I'm an active member in 3 different disciplines: IB, marketing, and entrepreneurship. And I think at my first thought would be that they've all kind of, like the culture and the norms, they've all evolved in a similar kind of a way. And that's just a function, I think, of organic growth within the field. Having said that, IB is different in one respect, and I'm a benefactor of it. Not sure if you're aware of this, but in the early 1990s, Copenhagen Business School ran something called the Danish Summer Research Institute, and that was 91 to 93. And they pulled 25 junior scholars from around the world, and I was one of them in 1991. So you had to apply, and they would select you, and they put us in for 2 weeks in a summer camp, literally and figuratively a summer camp on the coast in Denmark. And they brought in 25 senior scholars. So John Daniels and John Dunning and Jerry Album and all, the big names of the 1990s. And they're still big names, obviously. And I was probably 30. And I was joined there by people who are now the big names, like Rajesh Narula and the Zanders, Torben Pedersen. There was a whole group of us that were brand new PhD students that got together for 2 weeks to share our research ideas, to learn from each other, and to learn from these senior scholars. And they did that for 3 years. And that would have cost a bundle, but somehow they got the funding for it. And I think it was remarkable in terms of creating this whole new community of senior scholars. So if we were to look at this AIB group of fellows, there's a group of them, a good group of them, a large group of them that would have been part of that Danish Summer Research Institute. So that had a real impact on the culture of IB, I think, the network.
It's fascinating. Actually, I did interview Narula and Peterson. They haven't mentioned this one.
You better ask Narula again.
I will. I made a note of it.
I mean, maybe it was less influential for them, but I was in New Zealand. I was the furthest away, and for me, it was a big deal.
How come
I didn't even know who John Dunning was. So, I mean, that's how influential it became for me.
How come we don't do it anymore? How come this is not a repeated
I'm not sure.
activity every decade, maybe?
It's possible that there was a champion that is no longer in place. Like I say, it was pretty expensive. They had access to a facility where people working in a certain part of the Danish system could take their families for summer camps, and they blocked it off for 2 weeks for us. I don't know. I don't know why, but it was a game changer. And I'm pretty sure other people would say that as well, even if, they've gone on to do other things. If you ask them about it, they would recall it.
I will. Okay. Mentoring questions, the third final segment.
Sure.
When you were going through the program, what was the best advice, or any time in your life, what was the best advice you received?
Received versus, okay, so best advice was, it's not that it's advice, it is what I learned. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. I learned quite early that no matter what my advisor or committee was telling me, I needed to listen, even if I didn't want to listen. And I remember Rod Brody, he was my advisor, coming back from an IMP conference in Europe. IMP is the Industrial Marketing and Purchasing Group that Jan Johansson has been very active in the early years with. And he came back in about 1991, 92, and he said, you have to study networks as part of your dissertation. My dissertation was looking at internationalization, but it was coming at it from a different lens. And this was going to mean I was going to have to add in a whole new field that was emerging. And I didn't want to, and he said I had to, and I didn't want to. And we had this long discussion. In the end, I went for it. And oh my God, he was so right. Because my dissertation ended really being about networks and internationalization, and that set the stage for my career. All my big early papers, and quite frankly, they're not great papers, but they were at the right time in the right place. And so I learned early to listen. And the other point that I learned was challenge yourself. So I left New Zealand in 1990. No, I can't remember when I left New Zealand the first time. I've had 2 appointments there. And I moved to Calgary, to the University of Calgary. And I went in as associate professor without tenure, and that was my choice. So normally an associate professor would have tenure, but I had done a PhD in New Zealand. And I knew there were people in the area, in the marketing area at Haskayne, there was the University of Calgary, that didn't want to hire me because I didn't have North American training. And so to deal with that, I said, let me come in on tenure track, a short clock. And in my head, I was saying, I'm going to prove it to you. I'm going to prove to you that you've made the right decision in hiring me. So I challenged myself by taking the hard road, which is being tenure track in Canada, which initially they were going to offer me the associate professor. And I said, nope, I want to do tenure track to prove that I can do it. And basically to prove to the naysayers that they were fundamentally wrong. And so I did. And I've probably had that attitude most of my life. Tell me I can't, and I'll show you I will. And that applies to my academia and my academic career as well.
Super interesting. Nicole, what are the major mistakes that PhD students or junior faculty do that they shouldn't, that you see quite often?
Yeah, I think I'm seeing this a little bit less now, but I do still see it, is that, you know, when you enter a PhD program, it's kind of an IB program or a marketing program, or it's something that's really discipline specific. And that sets you up to be working in a silo. But anybody who works in international business knows that IB is not silo. IB is IB and economics, or IB and marketing. It's all, you know, they all kind of come under the umbrella of international. So none of my students focus on a single discipline. They may be international, but they're also working in entrepreneurship, or they may be marketing, but they also have international. They've got 2 feet that are balancing them, because I think if you're only in one discipline, it's too narrow. It may give you scope to have a lot of depth in the field, but when it comes to innovative research and teaching, I think it's better to have 2 disciplines that you're working across, and they inform each other. I think the other thing I see is that, you know, when people get excited about a theory or method, they want to believe it explains everything. And that's really rare, really rare. So, you know, concepts like internalization or bounded rationality, and I'm using some of the ones that Alain Bebreche has been working with over the years, but they do not explain everything. And all you have to do is look at people in organizations or watch organizations behave, and you know they don't explain everything. So same applies with method. I mean, if you're all about structural equation modeling, or, you know, a particular approach, it's not the only way to look at a problem. So that's when I'm looking at PhD students, I'm trying to encourage pluralism, because having a broader perspective to me is a more contemporary perspective.
So having a toolbox and not only a hammer would definitely help, you're saying. Nicole, this was very helpful. It was a splendid interview. Last question. What is one question I should have asked you but haven't?
Yeah, it's probably what I do when I'm not working. You know, is there anything I do that's not work related? My husband might say no, but I do, as I mentioned earlier, and I'm learning to do more of it, is to have time to read and paint and you know, do other things. Because again, if you're solely focused on one thing, and if it's all about work, you're kind of missing out on perspective that comes from doing other things as well.
In other words, what's next for you?
Well, I'm just off of sabbatical. I'm in a new position where it is, I'm new Lazaridis Chair of International Entrepreneurship and Innovation, which moves me away from being an administrator in the business school. I was the research director of the Lazaridis Institute. I'm done with that. So now I'm focusing all on research and my students. So that's it from a work perspective. And from a non-work perspective, we like to travel. My husband's Germany. My husband is German. And we want to get back on the road again as soon as COVID allows us to do so. So travel, art, and work.
Perfect. I wish you safe travels. I thank you for your time. I learned a lot. This was splendid. Thank you. I'm sure the audience will agree with me. Thank you so much.
Well, I
Nicole.
can't really compete with Peter Buckley wanting to be a ballet dancer. I thought that was fantastic.
Oh, you should watch the other ones.
I have been watching them. They're really interesting. Thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you.
Okay.